The city glowed at night, but not for everyone. Towering glass buildings sparkled like diamonds, while just a few streets away, a boy curled up on the cold pavement, his stomach empty, his dreams even emptier. His name was DeShawn, a black teenager, no older than 16 and already fighting battles most men twice his age never faced. Hunger gnawed at him, loneliness pressed in like a shadow, but he had one thing no one could take away: his ability to dance. On broken sidewalks with shoes worn to the bone, DeShawn would move as if the pain of life could be shaken off with every step. And sometimes people stopped to watch. Sometimes they even smiled. But most nights the city looked the other way. Across town, behind tall iron gates and guards in black suits, lived Richard Whitmore, a billionaire with power, pride, and walls so high he couldn't see beyond his own empire. His daughter Grace had once been the light of his world, but a tragic accident left her paralyzed, confined to a wheelchair. Richard spared no expense on doctors, machines, and endless therapy. Yet what Grace longed for most wasn't money, but joy. Real joy, the kind her father couldn't buy. One night their worlds collided. From her bedroom window, Grace heard faint music drifting in from the street. Peering through the glass, she saw him, a boy dancing under a flickering streetlight. His body told a story of struggle and resilience, every movement alive with something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. She watched, mesmerized. But what happens when a wealthy father discovers his fragile daughter is secretly captivated by a homeless black boy? In a city where prejudice runs deep and power decides who is seen and who is silenced, this simple connection will spark a chain of events that no one could have predicted. What Grace saw as hope, Richard would see as danger. And DeShawn? He was about to learn that the dance which kept him alive might cost him everything. DeShawn hadn't always lived on the streets. Once, there was a small apartment where laughter lived, where his mother sang gospel hymns while cooking beans and rice, and his father returned home tired but proud after long shifts at the factory. They weren't rich, not even close, but there was love. That was enough, until the world decided otherwise. His father, Jerome, a hard-working black man, collapsed one evening after a 12-hour shift. The company called it just one of those things, but everyone knew it was exhaustion, a life squeezed dry by endless labor. Without him, bills piled high, and his mother's health, already fragile, spiraled downward. When illness finally claimed her, DeShawn was left with nothing but memories. No family, no home, and no one to fight for him. The city didn't care. People walked past him as though his very existence was invisible. Shopkeepers scowled when he lingered too close. Police officers eyed him with suspicion simply for breathing in the wrong place. Every day was a choice between hunger and humiliation. But DeShawn discovered one small rebellion against despair: dance. His father once told him, "Boy, when life knocks you down, stand tall and move like it can't hold you." Those words stayed. So DeShawn danced. He danced to chase away the ache in his chest, to remind himself he was alive, to prove that joy could still exist even in broken places. Meanwhile, Richard Whitmore lived in a mansion that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled, but warmth was absent. Richard had clawed his way up from nothing, a self-made billionaire who never forgot the sting of poverty. Yet instead of softening him, success hardened his heart. He saw struggle as weakness, charity as waste, and emotion as a liability. The only person who ever cracked his armor was his daughter, Grace. Grace had been a bright spirit, always running barefoot through gardens, painting her world with laughter. But the accident, one rainy afternoon, a car spinning out of control, changed everything. Her legs were taken, her freedom stolen. Doctors said recovery was unlikely. Richard responded the only way he knew how: by spending. Endless therapy sessions, the finest equipment, the best doctors money could buy. Yet despite it all, Grace's smile had faded. She lived surrounded by luxury but imprisoned by silence. Grace longed for something her father couldn't give her: connection. She wanted to feel alive again, to see the world beyond the polished walls of her prison. Often she stared out her window, watching life pass by, wondering if she would ever feel part of it again. And then, one night, she saw him, a boy in ragged clothes moving beneath a flickering streetlight as though the universe had given him its rhythm. His body flowed with raw emotion, a language she didn't need words to understand. While everyone else dismissed him as a shadow, Grace saw freedom. But hidden beneath this fragile connection was a storm waiting to break. Richard's world was built on control, and DeShawn's world was built on survival. The moment those worlds collided, prejudice, fear, and buried truths would rise. Grace didn't know it yet, but the boy she watched from her window carried a secret, one that would not only change her life but reveal something shocking about her father's past. Something that had been buried, waiting for the right moment to resurface. For now, though, it was just a girl watching a boy dance. A moment of beauty in a city full of shadows. A spark neither of them could have imagined would soon ignite into a fire that changed everything. Grace could hardly wait for nightfall. Each day dragged on endlessly, hours stretching into eternity as nurses fussed over her schedule and her father buried himself in meetings. But the nights were different. When the city quieted and shadows lengthened, she would wheel herself to the tall window, heart pounding with a secret only she knew. Outside, beneath the trembling glow of a broken streetlight, DeShawn danced. Some nights his movements were sharp and fierce as though he was fighting invisible chains. Other nights they were fluid and soft, like waves rolling across an unseen shore. Grace never tired of watching. His body told stories her lips could never form, stories of struggle, of pain, but also of hope. One evening, unable to resist, Grace did something reckless. She pushed the window open and dropped a small folded paper into the night. It fluttered down like a fragile bird, landing near where DeShawn spun in a tight circle. At first, he didn't notice. Then, curiosity tugged his eyes toward it. He picked it up carefully, as if it might vanish. Written in shaky but deliberate handwriting were the words, "You dance beautifully." For the first time in years, Grace felt alive. DeShawn's chest tightened. Compliments were rare in his world. Most people looked at him with suspicion, not admiration. He glanced up, and though the glare of the mansion lights blinded him, he saw the faint outline of a girl in a wheelchair, framed by the golden glow of her room. He raised his hand, not daring to wave fully, just a subtle lift, a gesture of acknowledgement. Grace's lips curled into a smile she hadn't felt in so long. From that night on, their secret connection grew. Grace began leaving little tokens, scraps of paper with words of encouragement, a drawing of the night sky, even a single white ribbon from her hair. DeShawn cherished them, hiding each one in a small box he kept beneath an old blanket. They became his treasures, reminders that he wasn't invisible. Someone saw him. Someone cared. But not everyone was blind to what was happening. The mansion's head of security, a man named Carver, noticed DeShawn lingering near the gates more often. His sharp eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Street rats don't dance unless they're looking for trouble," he muttered to one of the guards. Soon, whispers made their way to Richard Whitmore. At first, Richard brushed them aside, just another nuisance in a city full of them. But when Carver described a black teenager loitering near the estate, Richard's face hardened. He had built his empire by eliminating threats before they grew too close. And in his mind, this boy was a threat. Grace, however, grew bolder. One afternoon, she convinced her nurse to wheel her into the garden. From there, she could see beyond the gates more clearly. And that was when DeShawn noticed her for the first time in daylight. Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the world seemed to pause. Grace raised her hand in the same subtle gesture he had once given her. DeShawn felt a lump in his throat. It was such a small act, but to him, it meant the world. Yet joy is fragile in a world built on prejudice. The very next day, DeShawn was chased away from a nearby grocery store. "We don't need your kind scaring customers," the owner barked, hurling insults that stung more than hunger ever could. DeShawn didn't fight back. He never did. Instead, he walked away with clenched fists, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. That night when he danced, his movements were sharp, explosive. Grace watched in silence, her heart aching with every twist and stomp. She could see his pain, even if she didn't know its name. And just when DeShawn thought the night couldn't get worse, flashing lights painted the street in red and blue. A police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, their hands already resting on their belts. "What are you doing here?" one demanded. "Just dancing," DeShawn answered quietly. The officers exchanged looks, skeptical, dismissive. "At this hour? In front of this neighborhood?" Their tone wasn't curious. It was accusing. Grace gripped the edge of her wheelchair, terror rising as she watched from her window. She wanted to scream, to call out, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. DeShawn stood still, refusing to move, his dignity the only armor he had left. For a tense moment it seemed the officers might drag him away. But then Carver, the head of security, stepped forward. "We've got our eyes on him," Carver said coldly. "If he crosses the line, he'll regret it." The police left, but the message was clear. DeShawn wasn't welcome. Not here. Not anywhere. And yet, when the street was quiet again, he looked up at Grace's window. She was still there, her hands pressed against the glass as if she could shield him from the world. DeShawn inhaled deeply, then began to dance once more. Slower, softer this time, as if to reassure her. Grace's tears blurred her vision, but her heart swelled. She knew then she had to protect him, no matter the cost. Days turned into weeks, and Grace's secret became the only thing that gave her life color. Every night she waited for DeShawn. Sometimes he came hungry, his frame thinner than before, but still he danced. Sometimes he came weary, his steps heavier, but still he moved. And always Grace was there to witness it, her silent encouragement drifting down in the form of notes, ribbons, and drawings. But with every secret, the risk of exposure grew. Richard had begun noticing changes in his daughter. She smiled more, her eyes sparkled with life, and she lingered by the window as though waiting for something. At first he was relieved. Perhaps the therapy was working, he told himself. But then suspicion crept in. What was she looking at? What had changed? One evening, he stepped quietly into her room, following her gaze out the window. He saw only shadows, but the frown on his face deepened. "Grace," he said gently, "you shouldn't sit up so late. It's not good for your health." She turned, startled, and mumbled something about the stars. Richard forced a smile, but doubt gnawed at him. He didn't believe in coincidences, and he certainly didn't believe in miracles. Meanwhile, DeShawn's life on the streets grew harsher. Food was scarcer, and cold nights bit harder. One particularly brutal evening, when his body shook from hunger, Grace couldn't stand it any longer. She left a small basket at the edge of the garden wall. Inside, she tucked a sandwich, an apple, and another note. "For strength, so you can keep dancing." When DeShawn found it, his throat tightened. He hadn't tasted kindness in so long that it felt foreign, almost unbelievable. For the first time in years, he ate until his stomach stopped aching. Then, wiping his mouth, he began to dance. Not for survival, but for her. His movements were light, almost joyful, and Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks as she watched. But someone else noticed, too. Carver spotted DeShawn picking up the basket and narrowed his eyes. Later that night, he reported to Richard, "Your daughter's been leaving food for a stray. A street boy. A black kid who doesn't belong anywhere near this house." His voice carried disgust, sharp and deliberate. Richard's jaw clenched. Memories flashed. His own youth, his own struggles. But he shoved them down. "I don't want him near here again." "Make sure of it." Carver nodded, and the order was clear. The next night, when DeShawn arrived, 2 guards waited by the gates. "Move along," one barked. DeShawn tried to explain. He wasn't causing trouble. He was just dancing. But their sneers silenced him. They shoved him back into the street, their voices laced with words that stung worse than the push. "You people never learn." From her window, Grace gasped, covering her mouth to keep from crying out. Her heart hammered as she watched DeShawn stumble, humiliation etched across his face. He looked up once more, searching for her, but the curtains had been pulled tight by the nurse under strict instructions. That night he didn't dance. He walked away, shoulders slumped, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Grace felt helpless. Her father's rules, the walls of the mansion, the nurse's watchful eyes, all of it was a prison. But she couldn't abandon DeShawn. The boy who had given her hope deserved better than silence. The next day, she begged her nurse to wheel her outside again. When the woman wasn't looking, Grace slipped a folded note into the grass near the wall. "Don't give up. I believe in you." That night, DeShawn returned. Bruised pride still lingered in his eyes, but when he found the note, he pressed it to his chest. Then, slowly, he began to move. His steps were softer, almost hesitant, but with each beat, confidence returned. He wasn't just dancing for himself anymore. He was dancing for the girl who refused to let him fade. But Carver wasn't done. He began following DeShawn in the streets, watching for a misstep. One evening, he cornered him near an alley. "Listen, boy," he hissed, shoving DeShawn against the wall. "You stay away from this place. That girl doesn't belong to you. She never will." His grip was iron, his tone dripping with menace. DeShawn's pulse raced, but he held his ground. "I'm not hurting anyone," he said quietly. Carver smirked. "Doesn't matter. Men like you, people like you, you're always trouble." Those words seared into DeShawn's heart. He had heard them before, from shopkeepers, from strangers, from the world itself. Always trouble, always less than. But as he walked away from the alley, bruised and angry, he reminded himself of Grace's words, "I believe in you." And so, he kept coming back. No matter how many times they tried to push him away, he returned, because the dance wasn't just survival anymore, it was connection. Back in the mansion, Richard's suspicion boiled into anger. Why does she keep smiling at night? Why is she looking out that window? His mind raced with paranoia. Finally, he decided enough was enough. He would see for himself. One night, he stood in the shadows of Grace's room, watching. When the faint figure of DeShawn appeared under the streetlight, Richard's blood ran cold. A homeless boy, black, dancing outside his home, his daughter watching him with shining eyes. To Richard, it was unacceptable, dangerous. But there was something else he didn't realize. That moment, watching DeShawn, stirred a memory buried deep inside him. A face from long ago, a man who had once saved him from a beating when he was just a boy. A black man. DeShawn moved with the same fire, the same defiance. But Richard shoved the memory down, refusing to acknowledge it. All he saw was a threat. And so, the stage was set. The secret connection between Grace and DeShawn could no longer remain hidden. The forces of power, prejudice, and fear were closing in. What began as a silent friendship was now spiraling toward a collision that would shatter all three of their lives. Because the truth was coming, and with it, a revelation that would shock them all. The night air was heavy, the kind that clings to skin and slows the breath. DeShawn stood beneath the streetlight, his body swaying with quiet determination. Tonight, he wasn't dancing for coins or scraps. He was dancing for her. Every step was a promise, every spin a whisper. You're not alone. But unseen eyes were watching. Richard Whitmore stood on the balcony, his face a mask of controlled fury. Tonight, he would put an end to this nonsense. He stormed through the halls, his footsteps echoing off marble floors until he pushed open the garden doors and strode toward the gates. Carver and two guards followed close behind. Grace, in her room, sensed something was wrong. She wheeled herself quickly to the window and froze. Her father was moving with the kind of anger she had come to fear, the cold, merciless anger that built his empire. "Hey!" Richard's voice cut through the night like a blade. DeShawn stopped mid-step, startled. The billionaire's silhouette loomed as he approached the gate. "What do you think you're doing here?" DeShawn opened his mouth, but no words came. He wasn't used to being addressed, not by people like Richard. "You've been trespassing," Richard spat, "lurking outside my home, polluting my daughter's nights with this spectacle." His voice dripped with disdain as his eyes flicked over DeShawn's worn clothes, his skin, his very existence. DeShawn's fists tightened. "I'm not hurting anyone," he said softly. Richard's lip curled. "You're hurting me." You're filling her head with illusions. You think a boy like you belongs anywhere near her? Near us? The guards moved in, grabbing DeShawn's arms roughly. He struggled, but their grip was iron. Richard stepped closer, his words venomous. "Look at you. No family, no home, no future. You're nothing but a stain on this city." From her window, Grace's heart pounded. She couldn't stay silent any longer. With trembling hands, she pushed her wheelchair toward the garden doors. Her nurse called after her, but Grace didn't stop. She burst into the night, her voice shaking but fierce. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Richard turned, stunned to see his daughter wheeling herself across the garden, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Grace, go back inside," he ordered, his voice sharp. But she didn't. She wheeled herself closer, closer, until she was just a few feet away from DeShawn and the guards holding him. "Let him go," she demanded. Richard's jaw tightened. "You don't understand—" "No," Grace interrupted, her voice stronger now. "You don't understand. He's the only reason I smile, the only reason I feel alive again. While you've been throwing money at doctors, he's been giving me hope." The words struck like thunder. Richard's eyes widened, but Grace wasn't done. "You see a threat," she continued, her voice breaking, "but I see freedom. When I watch him dance, I remember what it feels like to move, to live." Then, as if her words themselves had power, something happened that no one expected. Grace gripped the sides of her wheelchair, her knuckles white. Her body trembled, muscles straining, and with a desperate cry she pushed herself upward. For the first time in years, her legs held her. The guards gasped. Richard's face drained of color. Grace stood, unsteady but upright, tears streaming down her face. She took a trembling step toward DeShawn, then another. "You see?" she sobbed. "He gave me back what money never could." DeShawn's own eyes filled with tears. He had never imagined his dance could have such power, such impact. But Richard was not moved, at least not yet. His pride was a fortress, his fear disguised as anger. "This is nonsense," he stammered. "Coincidence." But even as he said it, something cracked inside him. Because in Grace's defiance, in DeShawn's fire, he saw a reflection of a man he had once known, a man who had saved him as a boy from a brutal beating in an alley. A black man named Jerome, the same name DeShawn had whispered when asked about his father. The realization hit him like a blow. This boy wasn't just some street dancer. He was the son of the man who had once stood between Richard and death. And now Richard was standing in that same alley, metaphorically but on the wrong side. The climax had come, not just for Grace's body, but for Richard's soul. The choice was clear: repeat the sins of the world or break the cycle. For a long moment, silence reigned. Only the sound of Grace's ragged breathing filled the night. The silence that hung over the garden was heavy, almost unbearable. Richard's mind spun as fragments of memory clawed their way to the surface. An alley, fists raining down, his body crumpling, and then a strong hand pulling him up. Jerome. The man who had shielded him. A stranger who owed him nothing, had saved his life. And now, standing before him, was Jerome's son. Richard staggered back a step, the weight of realization pressing on his chest. He had built his empire on control, on walls of pride and power. But in this moment, all of it felt hollow. The man he had once admired, the man he owed everything to, lived on in this boy, the very boy he was trying to destroy. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Jerome, was your father?" DeShawn, still held by the guards, nodded slowly. "Yes, he worked himself to the bone for people who never saw him. He died young, but he taught me to stand tall, to fight with joy, even when the world pushes you down." The words pierced Richard's heart. He waved his hand and the guards released DeShawn. The boy's arms dropped, red marks where they had gripped him too tightly. Grace, still trembling on her feet, reached out and took DeShawn's hand. The sight of it shattered something inside Richard. His daughter standing because of this boy, because of hope money could never buy. Richard's voice was low, almost ashamed. I didn't know." He turned his face as if unable to bear their eyes on him. For a man who had spent his life untouchable, it was the first time he looked truly human. Days turned into weeks, and change slowly seeped into the mansion like sunlight breaking through clouds. Richard softened, not immediately, not perfectly, but enough for Grace to notice. He no longer scoffed when she spoke of her dreams. He even sat by her window with her once watching DeShawn dance, not with suspicion, but with reluctant admiration. Grace's progress astonished the doctors. She grew stronger with each passing day, her legs unsteady but alive. "It's as if something inside you has woken up," one remarked. Grace smiled, knowing exactly what it was. As for DeShawn, life began to shift in ways he never imagined. Richard offered him food, clothing, even a chance to go back to school. At first, DeShawn resisted, pride and fear whispering that it was just pity, but Grace's voice cut through his doubt. "This isn't charity. It's justice. It's what you deserve." And so, he accepted. Slowly, carefully, but always with gratitude. The boy who once slept on concrete floors now had a place to rest, a roof over his head, and people who cared if he woke up in the morning. His dancing didn't stop. If anything, it grew brighter. He danced not only for survival, but for celebration, for the memory of his father, for Grace, who believed in him. One evening, months later, the mansion's garden was alive with laughter. Richard sat at a table, watching as Grace walked, unsteady but walking, across the grass. DeShawn danced nearby, his movements fluid and joyful, drawing smiles from the household staff who gathered to watch. For the first time in decades, Richard allowed himself to simply feel. No calculations, no walls, no battles for control. Just a father watching his daughter smile, and a boy reminding him of a debt that could never truly be repaid. He leaned back, whispering to himself, "Jerome, I hope you see this. Your boy saved us all." The story that began with hunger and suspicion ended with something rare, redemption. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And as the night stretched on, the flickering streetlight outside the gates burned steadily. No longer a beacon of loneliness, but a symbol of what could happen when hope refuses to die. Because sometimes, the most unexpected encounters don't just change lives, they change legacies. What DeShawn and Grace found in each other was more than friendship. It was proof that even in a world divided by prejudice, love, hope, and resilience can rewrite the ending. But here's the question for you. If kindness has the power to change lives, why do so many still choose hate? Think about it. And while you do, watch our previous video for another powerful story of injustice and redemption. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every time you do, these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Your support truly makes a difference.